This is Paul Nobles from Eat to Perform. I am here with April Blackford. April, do you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi, everybody.
So we actually finally came into the 21st century and figured out a way to podcast. So we're probably going to somewhere down the line call this the Your Diet Sucks podcast, because I am really attached to that name, and so is the rest of the staff. We all seem to like that. But for now, this will be the Eat to Perform podcast. And this week, what we're going to do is talk about MyFitnessPal and meal planning in an effort to try and help, some people with some ideas that are just starting off to Eat to Perform. And so this is the third class of the getting started. Most of the stuff previous to this was just kind of establishing a base of, how we think about eating, and then also how we're thinking about exercising. And so this is sort of the mechanics of, pretty much using a food log, foods that you want to have quickly available. I think one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that when I first started Eat to Perform, I was vehemently against recipes. And the reason why I was vehemently against recipes was because it basically just makes things too complicated in an unnecessary fashion. And so if you look at the way that I eat, it tends to be fairly mechanical, pretty simplistic. And then usually on the weekends, that's when my variety comes in and stuff like that. But, in general, my meals tend to be pretty simple. April, your meals are pretty simple, but they tend to be more evolved. Can you talk to people about what your meals look like in the meals for your family? Because you have older kids, younger kids, the whole gamut.
A lot of kids. No. I actually was having this conversation with someone today and basically said the exact same thing that you said, that, during the week, fairly simplistic. On the weekends is when I would do, like a complicated, like beef Wellington, or, kind of go all out on a recipe. I'm similar to you. I keep things simple, but I do keep some variety. So, I will keep, because the key for me is just not getting bored. And I'm the type that I can eat something, like I can eat chicken 2 days in a row, but after that, it's got to go. So I kind of keep some rotation in where I have 3 or 4 different, fairly easy to prepare protein sources, a variety of different greens, and a variety of carbohydrate sources. And then you mix and match and rotate everything. And then that way you don't get so bored.
So in your example, what would you say that are staples? Because I'll just say, like, my 2 meals that I cook, I always like to have some steak. A lot of people make a big deal of, should it be grass-fed? Should it not be? I tend to buy grass-fed, right? But if I didn't buy grass-fed, I would just buy lean. And I don't think that necessarily there's a huge advantage one way or the other. But I think, quality of meats does matter a little bit. And since I can afford it, that's what I do. So I like to have steak in the fridge. I do cook typically 3 pounds of ground beef. Like this week, as an example, I cooked, I used half of it for chili. Actually, I think I still have some chili, which is nice. Chili and rice tends to be kind of a go-to for me for a quick meal. But having ground beef is really easy. I mean, you can mix that in mashed potatoes, have a salad, and boom, you have a meal. My daughters actually are vegetarian, and so they tend to cook their own meals. They go for things like Greek yogurt. Couscous is a big one that they use, quinoa. And so they're actually very, very big into cooking. They will use tofu on occasion, like especially for like faux taco meat and stuff like that. But in general, they get their protein from milk, I don't think that they do eggs, but I'm not completely sure about that. But certainly peanut butter, things of that nature. So like the typical stuff that vegetarians will get through their protein sources. The other thing, and it's sort of legendary at this point, is the crock pot chicken, which, I remember putting out there, this crock pot chicken thing will change your life. And I only said that because it changed my life. I mean, basically you just throw either chickens or I use breasts. Have you done thighs before?
Yeah, thighs are actually a lot juicier. Yes.
Yeah, I've been wanting to do thighs, but I've typically done breast, which works real well. Obviously, chicken and rice, usually some type of broth. You can have like almost like a soup thing. Certainly with salads, it ends up being good. But yeah, I mean, I think with a combination of ground beef and chicken, you can, throughout the week, basically have a lot of quick go-to meals. And is it exciting? I don't know if exciting would describe it well. But it is stuff that I like, and I much prefer to have food available rather than not have food available. The other thing, and I guess I'm sort of getting into my top 10 list. First of all, like, if you don't know this and you're listening to this on a podcast, we also do this on YouTube, so you can check and see what, April and I look like as we're talking and waving our hands throughout the broadcast. But what we're talking about is the meal planning group that we have through Eat to Perform, and basically the coaches all have specific days where I just realized, by the way, that I missed my day last week. And then this week it's going to be on my birthday, so I'm probably not going to do this week either.
Your birthday would be the most awesome day to do it on.
No, I don't think it would be. No, I do like showing people that they can eat relatively flexible. I started taking pictures of this weekend. This weekend we went out with friends. My wife and I have two friends that we go out. They're two women, one that my wife used to work with, and then one of her friends. And her friend is actually in the restaurant business here in Minneapolis, which has a very, active restaurant scene. And so we went to a fancy restaurant on Friday night, got a bunch of pictures. But this whole weekend ended up being kind of restaurant and enjoy yourself weekend. So that was kind of fun. The workouts, I mean, for my workouts, I ended up having to do my long endurance on Saturday. So actually, it sort of fit really well. But in terms of like my go-tos are pretty simple. It's like, the chicken, ground beef steak, white rice. And like I said, all this is available. I think something like 15 coaches have like their top 10 list. We also have a drag and drop planner. I don't know if everybody's using that yet, but if you haven't signed up for that, that is really cool to use and a lot of fun. But mine, April's drinking kombucha. Kombucha is one of mine that I like to have. It's good for digestion. I like it because it's filling. It's great. Like I'll have it with popcorn as an example. Some of my other go-tos are like dark chocolate macadamia nuts. I always like to have that one available. Air pop popcorn, things of that nature. And just these little, I mean, the thing that I like about the popcorn is you can get some volume. I think you can get something like 8 cups of popcorn for 280 calories or something like that. And so if, I'm not necessarily looking to keep my calories low, but sometimes I eat 2 bigger meals a day. Not suggesting that everyone should do that. I'm just suggesting that works for me. But I do have some level of snacking. Actually, you know, I don't think that that's technically true anymore because I do the oatmeal in the morning, and I've been doing the oatmeal with like a Quest bar, and uh, I've been putting peanut butter and sometimes honey in there, and so that ends up being good. So for your go-tos, what would you say your go-tos are?
For me, I'm not big on leftovers. Some things I'll eat leftover, like if I cook a big batch of chicken breasts on the grill or something, I'll eat those for a couple of days. But for the most part, the key for me is having something that I can make in like 30 minutes or less. So I usually do the chicken breasts or the chicken tenderloins. I do a lot of lean ground beef. I do a lot of turkey loins. I do a lot of turkey chops and seafood. Seafood is like the easiest. That with the regular proteins in general, you have to thaw it out. You know, I have to remember in the morning and actually thaw it out. Or like with seafood, you know, like tonight I had wild shrimp for dinner, and you know, basically I just, you know, took out however much I was going to eat, threw it in a Ziploc bag and put it in some cold water in the sink, and it was thawed out in 5 minutes. And it literally takes 5 minutes to cook. So having a variety of protein is kind of key for me. And the carb sources, I'm kind of like you, fairly basic: white rice, sweet potatoes, quinoa. Sometimes I'll do the wild rice blend. I have a couple of tricks that I do, like with the rice. Sometimes I'll spend a little bit more. I usually go to the Asian market and buy like a 50-pound bag of jasmine rice and cook it in the rice cooker. But sometimes I'm lazy and I'll do the Success bowl in the bag jasmine rice or the basmati, because it has exactly 2 servings in every bag. And it literally takes 10 minutes to cook. You drain it and it's like the best rice ever. So you don't have to go through the trouble of weighing and all that stuff, because you know exactly how much is in there. Sweet potatoes, the trick with that is I'll cook it in the microwave and then finish it in the oven, and it tastes like it's been cooked for an hour and a half. For veggies, I'll usually have like 3 or 4 different varieties, like asparagus, or I'll have Brussels sprouts, or I have been big lately on at Trader Joe's the cruciferous crunch. Basically the kale, Brussels sprouts blend, all that stuff, and saute that up in coconut oil. That's really good. But just for me in general, is having a variety. I started going back to, I started kind of testing with different blends, making the soft serve ice cream with the Trader Joe's, the light coconut milk. And they have the wild green figs in the frozen section, the organic figs. The fig coconut ice cream is really, really good. So I've been kind of playing around. Basically, I have the coconut milk, and then I'll have pineapple or blueberries or wild berries or figs, and then that way you can have a different flavor every day. So
now, do you do a lot of whey protein?
I do it post-workout, and if I get busy in the afternoons, I'll drink a shake just to boost it if I see I'm going to fall short. But it is a staple for me to have, because I don't do dairy and I don't do gluten, obviously. Now, if I did dairy, it would be much, much easier, because of course you have the Greek yogurt, you know, the lower sodium cottage cheese, you know, which I think cottage cheese kind of tastes disgusting. But if you blend it in a food processor with some frozen fruit, it actually tastes like soft serve ice cream. And you can put a half a scoop of protein powder in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the tricks that we often teach people is, you know, protein powder with yogurt, things of that nature tends to be pretty positive, and most people like it. You know, like if you do like peanut butter protein, you will, you know, a lot of people think that that's like, you know, in Greek yogurt is sort of like pudding. I don't really do a lot of whey protein. I've actually done a little bit more, trying to get in some fast loading carbohydrates later in the evening, and so we can talk about that in a little bit. But that's actually something that April kind of coaxed me into, and thankfully she did. Well, we can go into it right now. It's not that big of a deal, but usually if you're struggling getting in carbohydrates, one of the little tricks that we teach people is some level of fast carbohydrates through cereal, through breakfast cereal. So like Fruity Pebbles, Cocoa Pebbles, Captain Crunch, all manner of things like that. And so, is it necessary? I used to do like coconut milk smoothies, trying to stick with like a healthier version. But I have to say, like, well, my fats were starting to get a little higher, and so this gave me another way to get an additional amount of carbohydrates. But what's probably most important about it, and then I do it in whey protein. Otherwise, normally I wouldn't. I don't do it in milk. I don't do well with dairy. It seems like a lot of people don't, but certainly you would get more protein for your buck through whey protein and cereal. And so that ends up being, like I said, an option if you're looking for more carbohydrates. People tend to focus, like if you're relatively new to Eat to Perform, it might shock you because everyone's so anti-sugar. Frankly, I don't eat that much sugar throughout the day, so it ends up being sort of like a dessert. But any thoughts on that? Because I know,
well, I think the key component that you failed to mention was just the game changer on sleep, and that's why, and again, I'm the type that I'll do something for a period of time and then I get bored and then I need to change it type thing. With cereal, I'll probably have maybe 10 different varieties. But sometimes I want to do the ice cream route, or the sorbet or whatever, things like that. But I can tell you that time and time again, even though I'm kind of off my cereal kick and I don't feel like eating it, my sleep is just so much better, with the cereal. And I would like to say that I found some treasures this past weekend that you probably remember this, Paul. This stuff was out in like the 70s. The Count Chocula. I got all 3 flavors. The Count Chocula, the Boo Berry, and the Frankenberry is back. All 3 flavors.
Are you trying to say I'm old?
No, I'm old. I remember it when I was little. It's all back. All of it's back.
I'm just saying, like I'm insulted, but no. I mean, I think that one of the things that people like about Eat to Perform is that they get to eat a little bit more flexibly. I think a lot of people, if you're coming from a inflexible background, or you've eaten with a rigid naughty and nice list and stuff like that, and let's say that you started Eat to Perform and you were eating 12 to 1300 calories, it might be a while before you want to try the cereal trick, right? Because your body's going to be relatively inflexible in the beginning, and you may never need that many carbohydrates, and that may never feel right for you. I think one of the things that's sort of interesting, and we always get this like in the comments, you don't see this much, but we see this a lot in the advertisements we do, where people ask, well, what if I eat paleo, or what if I eat vegetarian, or what if I eat, and what people don't understand about Eat to Perform is that you could basically eat any way you want. The general idea, though, is that we all have a metabolic number that our body wants to be at, and we all perform better as human beings pursuing more, right? And that doesn't mean that you would never eat less. It just means that the majority of the time you're going to try and seek that normalization, that stabilizing of the system that just is going to make you feel better. And most people report that, once again, when their body's being fed an adequate amount of food, they feel, less fatigued, more energy for their workouts, more energy throughout the day. And so all those things tend to be pretty positive. And then also their relationship with food tends to change. What I think that we've sort of seen over the last 3 years is that, there's a lot of folks out there that have a lot of preconceived notions about food. And then once they start adding food, they start to think, well, gosh, I'm going to gain so much weight or this and that. And the reality is if you are really focusing on increasing your metabolism, the weight gain, it's not like zero, but it can be. We've certainly seen instances where when people start eating an adequate amount for what they do, they will lose weight. I think what happens for a lot of folks is if they were eating 1,200, 1,300 calories, they'll tend to focus on like 2 or 3 pounds as if like, that 2 or 3 pounds is going to stay with them for the rest of their life. But when you think of someone that, we've seen many people that we've taken eating 1,300 calories that were supposed to be eating 2,600 calories. And so they start eating 2,600 calories. Their sex life is better. The workouts are better. I mean, literally everything in their life changes, and then they want to focus on the 2 to 3 pounds. And so we just try to get people focused on the fact that, if you have a high functioning metabolism, somewhere down the road, we can look at strategic deficits. But I think, what people tend to want to do is they want to, they haven't had a lot of success with dieting. That's why they've landed at Eat to Perform. And then, they start to feel a lot better about themselves. Their relationship with food changes. But in the end, they secretly want to diet, right? At least that's what happens in the beginning. I say 2 to 3 months into your Eat to Perform journey, you start to realize like your whole damn life has changed. And the idea of, just jumping back into even a very short diet cycle actually seems like a net negative. Any thoughts on that, April?
Yeah, jumping back, once you know how it feels to be properly fed, jumping back into the, the diet mentality or the deficits definitely is not very appealing. Definitely not. And I agree with what you were saying about, some people that are coming from the underfed background. Ultimately, that is what they want to do is diet, and, I think the key is to realize that, where they're coming from, the calories, there is no magic of, eating 1,000 calories more the next day, and all of a sudden the fat's just going to start melting off. It's years and years and years of, repairing that you have to do, over the course of a few months, and if that's all it has to take is for a few months, to get your metabolism at a healthier rate, then, it all works out for you in the end.
Well, I remember having a conversation with one of our clients, and she was talking about the fact that she gained a couple pounds, and then we talked about all these things that were going positive for her and stuff like this, and I just asked her. I said, how long did you give low calorie, low carb a try? And she said, well, I've been doing that since I was like 15 years old. I said, well, can you give me 6 more weeks? I don't think that most people think, we want people eating an adequate amount for what they do most of the time, but it's not like we're saying to you, you can never eat at a deficit eventually, right? And so we do stand in contrast with virtually everything out there. I would say virtually everyone is saying the exact opposite, but they don't have any real numbers. And so when we put someone in, like for instance, let's say that you were going to just like a normal, nutritionist or diet type person. A lot of times they're going to give you numbers just based on averages. They're not going to give it based on how much you've been eating. And so people say, well, why do you need to know how much I've been eating? Well, how else would you come up with an actual deficit? How else would you come up with, what the real plan is? And so the formulas that we use have been around for years, certainly, increasing metabolic function can be a tricky game for some folks, but, in the end, you probably wouldn't be listening to this podcast or watching this broadcast or in this webinar if you were in a healthy spot in the first place, And so I think that, we all have kind of our demons that we have to deal with, but, when you talk about like just the various hurdles that everyone sort of goes through, and I really do think that meal planning, as much as I think that a lot of people think that meal planning is like the end all be all solution, and if they could just figure out meal planning, that, they'd be shredded. And honestly, it doesn't really work like that, but it does provide you with light, with a little less confusion in your life. One of the things that, I've been kind of fond of talking about a little lately is that President Obama only owns two types of suits. He has a gray version and a blue version. And he has like numerous versions of these two suits. And the reason why he has that is to eliminate like the confusion of thought, right? He either goes, today is gray or today is blue. And I think that's what meal planning does. When you think of how stressful all of our lives are, the meal planning does give you some ideas. And so when you look at Eat to Perform coaches as an example, and you go, man, there's 60 people that do Eat to Perform, and you get to look at their food logs, I think that that's huge. I think that that's something that really doesn't exist. I mean, certainly there's templates on the internet, you can find that type of stuff, but can you talk to that person, right? Can you, have a conversation like, can I use agave here, or can I use honey, or can I use, Brussels sprouts because, quinoa doesn't work for me. I think those types of conversations are pretty huge. Any last thoughts before we sort of get off of meal planning? Jenna did ask me what my fat grams are. My fat grams typically go anywhere from 75 grams to 100 grams. They're probably more like 100 grams right now because I'm in more of a maintenance phase. I would say on my workout days, I'm probably on my rest days, my fat grams are closer to 100. My workout days, I would say they're closer to 80 because I try to get mostly carbohydrates on those days so I could get muscle protein turnover, recover better. I actually did debate on having this one on super compensation, and it sounds like a really good conversation, but the carbohydrates that you eat tend to be more favorable as it relates to recovery because your muscles can use those more efficiently. It uses fat fairly efficiently at rest, and that's one of the reasons why we suggest relying a little bit more on fats for your rest days. Any thoughts on any of that, April, before we kind of get into kind of the MyFitnessPal topic?
I'm gonna have to say I agree with the suits, and I think a lot of times it's, and I am guilty of this, when you have too many options, you become undecisive. When you have too many options and you're like, oh, what do I choose? What do I choose? You can't make up your mind and it takes too long. I think a lot of people that are new to meal planning have that same issue where they just don't know how to put it together. It's like they know it all, the food, but there's just too many options and they just don't know. So I think a lot of times it's just the simplicity of, tell me what to eat, or it's the simplicity of, a lot of times they're second guessing and thinking, if they eat the wrong thing, they won't get the right results, and, and things like that, but, I think the meal planning, the group is, it's awesome. Where else are you going to find, high protein pancake recipes and, cookies, nice protein dishes, and pretty much anything, it's almost like an interactive cookbook actually, which is kind of cool,
Yeah. We have talked about cereal and cookies and stuff like this, but the majority of the dishes actually end up being, kind of creative salads, different main menus, certainly, crock pot type stuff. And I think that more than anything, it's sort of empowering, for people to have, food available to them, because let's think about it, all of us are, when we don't have food prepared and it becomes overbearing and then your life becomes kind of hectic, you will opt for the easiest option, and that isn't always going to be something that fits what, I don't want to say like good food, bad food, but it's not always going to end up being the healthiest option. And then all of a sudden, you're on this downward spiral, and it really does come down to, if you don't make it a priority, it doesn't happen. Right. And so I remember I actually had a conversation with one of our clients today, and I was talking to her, and, we sort of started to run down because she was very overwhelmed. And we started running down all the priorities in her life. And, it took her a while to get to food and health, and really that needs to be first, and if you put those things first, then of course, some of the other stuff comes together a lot easier. I know that if I don't have food prepared, and then, something, some pseudo emergency comes up, well, now all of a sudden I'm in trouble, and it's a more stressful event for me. And so that's part of the big argument there. We haven't really been taking a lot of questions, because we've tried to walk through this a little bit, but this is going to be one of the shows where, we will, if it's, on topic. Someone's saying, how do you access the coach's food logs? Is that in the forum? It's not in the forum. Actually, it's in the meal planning group.
Actually, if you were to look up any of the coaches on the forum, their food logs should be in their signature line.
Yeah. So most of them have that there, but I would say that the good majority of people, every single day, there are roughly, I think, 4 to 5 people posting their food log on that given day.
Yeah.
In the meal planning group, there's top 10 lists, there's the drag and drop. So there's a lot of resources there. So, I think what happens for a lot of people is they start off with Eat to Perform, they get a lot of information, but, and we are working on something to try and streamline that process a little bit. But one of the best resources is the meal planning group on Facebook. And so that's where I think you'll find the most useful information. The one argument that I would make is that go to files, when you're looking at it, what I think happens is I end up looking at a lot of stuff on my PC or laptop. And so it's easy to find the files. Whereas if you're looking at it on an iPad or a phone, maybe it might not be as easy. But if you could look for the file section, I think that's where you'll find the most helpful information. In terms of MyFitnessPal, I would say, let's just assume that people know how to make their MyFitnessPal public and things of that nature, right? And even if they don't, we are going to start putting out some videos and stuff like that to sort of show them. That's like basic level stuff that you sort of learn first day of Eat to Perform. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. What I want to spend a lot of time on, though, are the various like little ninja tricks. What's your go-to MyFitnessPal? There's going to be a lot of people that are watching this going, that's really super simplistic. And then some people are going to go, that's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. So what do you like to go to that you think is the most useful?
I generally mostly log mine on my phone. And for me, it's, when you're first starting out and I talk to people every day in regards to this where they're not accustomed to using it and they find it a little bit overwhelming. But if you can either do two things. You can either take an hour or two, and if you're like me and you eat the same kind of similar food groups to some extent, you can take about an hour or two, and you can actually backlog the day before, and you can add in just a whole ton of different food items that you're going to use repeatedly. So that's one thing. And then that way everything is all added for you and you're not overwhelmed with it taking you, because when you initially get started and you're not accustomed to logging your food, it can take you 10, 15 minutes, just searching and verifying and things like that. So if you actually sit down and spend a little bit of time in inputting your foods, you can actually add them to your, let me look. You can actually add them to your frequent foods, or I think you can save it. You can save the foods and then it will be added as a regular entry. So the thing for me is whenever I add, because it literally takes me, okay, so you have your recent, your frequent, my foods, and then meals and recipes. So if you have a basic recipe like you, Paul, with your chili that you make, you can just input the recipe in there, call it Paul's Chili. And if it's something that you make every week or every couple of weeks, you have it right there where when you go to log it in for dinner or lunch or whenever you eat it, you pull up recipe, there's going to be Paul's Chili, click it, serving size, and you're done, rather than stressing about. Some people like to input everything in the recipe. I'm fairly basic in regards to I'll do the protein, carbs, fats, of a recipe. I don't concern myself with, if it's got green pepper in it. I'm not going to concern myself with adding that, but some people are kind of OCD about that. But if you input your foods, or if not, if you don't have time to do that, once you have a good week or two under your belt, everything will be saved in at least the recent or the frequents. So all you do is you pull up and say you're going to enter your lunch and pull up your frequent, and then it's going to have all those normal foods, pages and pages of foods that you like to eat. And if you click there's a double circle with a check. If you click that, it actually allows you to add multiple items at one time. So you basically can click that, add 5 or 6 items, click enter, you're done. So that's probably the easiest thing for me. One trick, I am not tech savvy at all. No surprise. And I felt like a complete idiot because I did not know this for forever. And then when I found out, I was like, oh my God, this is like the best thing ever. A lot of times when you're using it on your phone and you actually have inputted a meal in, when you have inputted a meal in, to actually go back and, let me pull it up. To go back and look at the macros on it, it can be kind of confusing. So if you take your smartphone and you flip it over to the side, it actually shows all of your detailed macros, the calories, carbs, fats, protein, sugars, things like that. So you can actually see your whole day total there without actually having to go down to the other tab and then go to nutrition and then go to the other page. So that was a key thing for me because, I was like, how could I have not known this after all this time? That all you got to do is turn it to the side. So
that's an example that I think is really super helpful for a lot of people. But the old hats are like, well, I've known that forever. But what it does is it gives you the PC view. And actually, I think the phone is probably more useful than the PC. I think it's just a little bit more intuitive, but the PC has its value. You can see it on a bigger screen. So a couple things that I wanted to talk to before we get into like a couple other ninja type tricks. Veggies, and should you log your veggies? That is a very hot topic. This is one of these things that gets, as a staff, we sort of struggle with this type of stuff. There are people that, don't find it all that helpful to log veggies because, one of the things that April was talking about, with the green pepper and various little things that makes it more tedious. The problem, as you make something harder, you are less likely to use it as a tool. So when I'm logging my food in general, I don't log my veggies because I know, in general, I'm trying to stay under about 35 grams of fiber. And, I know what that looks like in terms of vegetables. I would say if you're new and new to Eat to Perform, you probably should log your vegetables. And the reason why I would make the argument for that is because there's a lot of you out there that are eating way too much fiber, and it's ultimately hurting you because there's a lot of people that will say, oh my goodness, this is just so much food. Well, of course it's so much food. You're eating like 3 heads of broccoli every single day. And so when you log that, coaches can look at it and say, hey, look, you're going a little heavy on the broccoli here. Similar can be said for sodium. Do I log sodium? No, not really. But I might sweat more than you do, right? I might work out more than you do. And so sodium is not going to be something that's going to affect me the way that it might affect you. And so a lot of times if somebody, isn't used to counting, or they've been overly reliant on processed foods and they're not logging sodium, well, they might be really, really holding on to excessive water. I haven't really seen too many people that have a huge, huge sodium issue. But I would argue that they don't have a sodium issue, they have a workout issue. If you're sweating and you're doing like very vigorous activity, then you'll be able to get rid of, your sodium issue. But if you're not doing near as much as, somebody who can get away with a good amount of sodium, then it's probably more important for you to log that. I mean, what are your thoughts there? Because I know sodium is one of the things that you tend to, kind of call people on a little bit more.
Yes, I do call people out on it. On occasion, if it's a random day, not a big deal. But if it's a consistent trend and their weight the scale's a little higher than normal, I will recommend reducing it. And I have seen, generally depending upon the levels of sodium, I've seen females that carry, 5-6 pounds of water retention, and I've seen males. I've worked with a male. I worked with one before, he was carrying 13 pounds that he dropped in 2 days. It was just sodium was just that high. I track my sodium. I do not add things like, I use pink sea salt in my cooking. I do not track that. I'm not that rigid about it. But I do actually look at MyFitnessPal and look at, the sodium in general and kind of track that and use it as a guideline. Some people, I agree with you that, everybody's different. Some people sweat more. Some people need more. Some people are more sensitive to it. As a general rule, I'll never forget one of the calls that I had, and, I was talking to, the coaching client in regards to her sodium. And I asked her, I said, well, when you wake in the morning and you make a fist, are your fingers tight? And this was just the funniest thing ever. She said, I usually don't make a fist when I wake up in the morning, which made me laugh. But the next day she did it, and she immediately contacted me and was like, oh my God, you're right. If your fist is really tight and you have, I call them sausage fingers, then you're retaining water. So that's always the true test for me. If I go out, to a restaurant or anything like that, and I know my sodium is pretty much blown for the day. The next day, true telltale test is always my hands are tight when I make a fist. And I've had days where, I'll tell my husband, I'm like, oh my God, look at my fingers. They look like sausages. And he will agree. You can tell. In regard to the veggies, I log mine. I do not log, we were talking about like the chili recipe earlier. I don't log veggies that are in like trace amounts, that it calls for like a half a cup of green pepper or anything like that. I'm not that rigid, but I do log, majority of my vegetables. I do not weigh them, and I just eyeball them. I think weighing them is just going to be another step that, just go by a cup, 2 cups, whatever, for the most part, eyeball it just to get a general amount. I mostly track mine specifically. I don't really have the fiber issue, but, you know, I'll track mine for the micronutrient, you know, issue where, you know, if you may want to get your iron levels up or anything like that, you know, you can kind of track, you know, overall with, you know, the veggies, things like that.
Well, here's the other thing too. I mean, so I remember having this conversation with Dr. Tracy Mann where we were talking about logging your food, and she was making the argument that, you know, logging your food can be tedious and you know, kind of a burden over time, and you know, you would have to be it can set up a bad relationship with food. And then I suggested to her, I said, have you ever logged your food trying to normalize or you know, in kind of like this expansion mode where you're going from like a low calorie count to what your normal calorie count? And she admitted, you know, that, you know, she hadn't really heard of many people doing that. And one of the things, I think April will admit this as well, is when I'm not logging, and I actually don't log near as much as April or really a lot of the other Eat performers. I tend to try to eat more freely, but when I will start logging is when I start to suspect that I'm under eating. And one of the things that I can say to you guys, especially if you're coming from an underfed background, is when you're logging to try and fit more food in, it is infinitely more fun than, you know, the opposite way where you're restricting food. But you still, you know, you still feel like if you don't log, you undereat. Is that correct, April?
Yeah, I have gotten, you know, by default, yes, I agree. And I'll still, you know, I'll still go back. Some days I don't complete my days, you know, because I've been doing this for so many years that I have a proper, you know, eye and a feel for exactly how much I eat. You know, obviously I know that if it's a day that I miss a snack or, you know, whatever, miss a meal, I know I'm going to be short. So I might go back in and plug everything in just to see where I need to fill things in at. But yes, that used to be the big issue for me, you know, and I do think that over time, you know, a lot of people do get, you know, to that level where they have the proper feel in the eye, you know, to know the proper amounts that they need to eat, and they can move to more of an intuitive way, you know, and I tell them all the time, that's the goal. You know, if you're making progress and your, you know, your performance is up, then you're doing it right. But obviously if you know, start going in the opposite direction, that you need to go back in and log and kind of see where you're at, you know, see if you're under eating or overeating, or, you know, because it comes from both different directions, you know. Some people
that's how I do it. I still find it very helpful even to this day and very enlightening to log even occasionally, you know, because I do know, you know, I mean, I think the thing that is most interesting when you're logging from the standpoint of eating to your activity level is that you will often undereat if you're not prepared. And that's another argument for preparation. The one thing that I did want to talk to before we got too far away from sodium, there is the sodium-potassium relationship that I think we need to talk about, because usually you can process sodium a little bit better if you're having potassium sources. Probably the best potassium source out there is potatoes. You know, leafy greens are also, but the problem that you run into with leafy greens is they tend to be fibrous, and so if you're over reliant on leafy greens, that can be kind of a net negative, bind you up, things of that nature. So, you know, the big issue with potassium sources and the best sources of potassium is they tend to carry a caloric load. Well, guess what? In our instance, a caloric load is not bad. And so eating a good amount of potatoes, you know, I think that once you start to realize, you know, the amount of carbohydrates that you can actually get away with and how that allows you to perform, you know, in the gym and see a result. I mean, everyone always says, right, I want to gain muscle and lose fat. And we could have an argument about whether or not, you can actually do that at the same time. But if you're going to do that, right, you're going to want to have muscle protein turnover. You're going to want to allow some of those carbohydrates to process. One of the things that we hear a lot with Eat to Perform is, oh, I've been following the plan, my workout days, I have 350 grams of carbohydrates. My workouts are great. I'm PRing everything. And then you go, well, how are things going with your rest days? And they'll go, well, that day really doesn't, make that big of a difference. And like, I have 3 rest days, and oftentimes if you're struggling with bloated and weights up a little bit, you're not allowing the food to process, and you're not allowing your body to adapt to the stimulus. That's actually what we talked a lot about in week 2, where recovery is so, so important. And I've been actually showing a lot of pictures of my heart rate variability. And what heart rate variability tests is, first of all, your resting heart rate, but also your ability to recover. And, what's been interesting for me is, it's made me much more conscious of eating an adequate amount on the days that I'm working out, but in particular on some of my long endurance days. Like as an example, I lift heavy 1 day a week. I do some hypertrophy work. All of these things kind of like, you're digging a little bit of a hole, right? And so you want to have that rest day so you can kind of fill the hole back in with some dirt, and then hopefully like a little muscle tree sprouts, right? And that would be a good thing. But what most people do, is they dig the hole, and then they just keep digging, and then they just keep digging, and they're not allowing an adequate amount of recovery. And that's really where fats and carbohydrates play a really good role, because one, if you look at the carbohydrates and you look at the muscle protein turnover and feeling better to your workouts and things of this nature, but then you look at fats and you look at keeping hormone levels correct, vitamin uptake, all these things end up being a super positive. But also the satiating effect of fats, on those rest days that allow you to recover, I think is super huge. One thing that when we talk about, any level of carb cycling, people want to get too extreme with that kind of stuff. And one of the things that we've found is that the more extreme you get, the more it impacts the following day's workout. And so we like to keep your carbohydrates in the neighborhood of your workout days. So, you don't want to have, let's say, 350 grams of carbohydrates on a workout day and then have 125 grams, because it will just be too taxing for your system. Most people, especially with activity trackers and a lot of people wearing Fitbits and stuff like this, you find that your workout days aren't vastly different from your rest days. And, one of the things that we suggest that allows people to eat a little bit more flexibly is to make walking on your rest days a bit more of a priority. And that allows for a little bit more flexibility. I know, as an example, on Saturdays, I tend to go for a little bit longer hike because I like to eat a little bit more flexibly, but it actually is a rest day for me. And so a lot of times my carbs on Saturdays, aren't far different from my carbs on, let's say, Friday. Now, I will say Friday is my long endurance day, so I am still trying to recover, and so oftentimes I will need some carbohydrates even on that rest day, just as kind of a carryover effect from from the long endurance day. The one thing that I will say, I kind of got into it a little bit. If you're a runner, I can tell you that weightlifting, even CrossFit, these types of things, don't take as much out of you as running. At least that's what my experience is. And so, you know, you need to allow for a little bit more rest, and you need to allow for a lot more food than you probably think is okay. The other thing that was sort of interesting about your sodium thing, whenever you go to like a nicer restaurant, I thought this restaurant was nice, but man, they were just like, everything was super, super salty. So when I came home, I kind of had, that bloated, salty look. But man, woke up shredded. I think people really underestimate carbs and sodium as it relates to nutrient uptake, because when we're talking about what we're trying to teach you guys with Eat to Perform, and ultimately how to get the most out of your workouts, essentially what we're trying to do is take foods that's outside of the cell and load them into the cell and make the cells more useful. And some of what people will look at with a bloated stomach, or they'll see those things as a negative, but it's really that excess that sort of allows you to explore. I mean, most people have explored the low end of things, but they haven't tried the higher end of things near enough. And one of the arguments that I often make on coaches calls, one, April and I both work as a team of coaches, and we have a group coaching program through Eat to Perform, where we do talk to privates, where we do talk to clients on more of a one-on-one accountable type basis. And frankly, the people that are by like the group coaching and then just use the forums, they benefit so much from that information, because we are able to, talk to people, and all of a sudden you'll hear 3 people talk about a similar thing on 3 separate calls, and then we think, well, let's bring that up in the webinar, right? So that usually ends up being a plus. But I think that, for a lot of people that are looking for a little bit more hand-holding, that program tends to be kind of a good thing.
I think the big thing is the accountability. They have the accountability, and I think a lot of people do exceptionally well when they have some level of accountability. Someone to report into, someone to talk to when they need to, or ask questions anytime they need to. Going back to the salt and carbs, I absolutely agree.
Wait. I have to stop you for just a second, because what you're saying is really super important there. Okay, imagine a scenario where you have a team of people, including doctors, that you can talk to on anything related to, food, but also your workouts. So in that way, you get a lot of discussions about health from roughly, on the group coaching team right now, I think we have something like 18 people and then 2 PhDs that are in that program. That's a lot of resources that most people just don't have, and like, I would put that up against anything out there, right? I mean, certainly there's, some really super high level. I mean, if you're an Olympian, maybe there might be a more, one-to-one type stuff. But in general, I think what we're offering is about the best there is for something that scales real well. But go ahead, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say the salt and carbs combination, that's how bodybuilders, plump their muscles up right before competition. It's the salt combined with the carbs, that's the magic trick.
Yeah. So Jenna was asking, what about trace minerals? This is actually a big thing that Mike Nelson talks about, and one of the things that I think sort of goes unnoticed. It's one of the 15 things that goes unnoticed when people start eating an adequate amount of food. But oftentimes you will hear people say that, people should take a multivitamin, whether they should or shouldn't, that's sort of, person dependent. But when you start eating an adequate amount for what you do, you will often end up getting more trace minerals, more, vitamins, more, of the things that you need because you're eating an adequate amount of food. So not only are you getting the vitamins that you're taking in through, fibrous vegetables or something of that nature, but also in terms of protein, in terms of, even like whey protein, as an example, has a high antioxidant value. So you get like a lot of positives by just eating an adequate amount of food. And it's sort of the opposite of everything that everybody says. And so, you almost have to like shout it from the rooftops that like, hey, look, the end game for all of us is to thrive, to, function well as a human being. And so, the other trick that, I'd be remiss, it's my favorite trick. Nobody seems to be all that into it. But what's nice about having other public food logs is that you can actually go to April's food log as an example, and then you can use, I think it's called Quick Tools, and you can copy entries from every Eat to Perform coach. You can copy, a meal that you like from their food log into your food log using Quick Tools. And a lot of people don't know about that. And I think that that's super helpful. Is it like the most helpful thing ever? Maybe not, but it's kind of a cool trick when you can do it, especially if you're kind of searching for, meal ideas. In the beginning, it's a good way to do it. I think the drag and drop tool that we have now is awesome because, not only can you just like sit there and look at what a meal, one of the best things you guys can do is to plan your meals the day before, or like April said, even almost days ahead. And when you think about, I mean, I think about it all the time. Every family jokes about this, where, if I ask my wife, what she wants to eat for dinner, she never knows. You know what I mean? And so when you can plan your meals days ahead of time or one day ahead of time, it could potentially save your marriage. I mean, and I'm kind of joking about that, but I'm sort of not joking about that because, when you think about all the stress related to not knowing what you're going to be eating and then preparing that and then who prepares it and stuff like that, that tends to be fairly stressful. So
I would say the biggest success that I've seen from new people starting out who are kind of new to logging is a lot of times people would actually sit down, like what you said, plan ahead of time the day before. They would actually sit down tonight and plan tomorrow's everything, all meals and snacks, and then you can see it all over the forum, in the coaching group, in the meal planning group, everywhere. There's more and more testaments of people that say, when I sit down and I plan everything in advance, I stick to it. When I have a plan, I stick to it. When I don't have a plan and I'm going into it blindly, that's when you stop at Subway or, stop at the convenience store, or just don't eat or undereat. And then you go home and you look and you're like, oh shit, I've got 1,000 calories to eat. How am I going to eat this? So when you plan things in advance, it kind of sets you up for success.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to toot my own horn, and I'll toot your horn a little bit. I mean, when you look at most of the Eat to Perform coaches, we do have a pretty good plan. When you look at, April's workout routine, I have a pretty good idea what April's workout routine is because, you know, it's been the same thing for the last 5 years, you know, and when you look at, you know, how I work out, you know, I mean, today I had to do the Wadapalooza qualifier, which was sort of annoying because this is a day that I normally don't work out. And so it kind of messed with my program a little bit, you know, but, you know, in general, the more, you know, regimented you can be with certain things where it becomes a habit, you know, that ends up being a positive. And I think that that's actually one of the biggest values of you know, not just the coaching relationship, but the community relationship. And you know, just that there's an expectation when you look at everybody you need to perform, there's an expectation that we work out, you know, and I think that's a positive. You know, I definitely don't think that's a negative. Now, does that mean that we always work out? I mean, one of the recommendations that I mentioned to a client today, I asked her, or I challenged her to just for the next 2 weeks to organize her life a little bit and, you know, kind of, you know, get a massage, take a nap, you know, start putting herself first on the list. Because, you know, when you look at the way that I structure my walks throughout the day, or you know, my private time with my family and stuff like that, all those things are really important pieces of the puzzle. It's nice to have a good routine in place, but there's sometimes where you have to vary from that. And I think that one of the things that happens as we're talking about planning and stuff like this is it's not rigid. It's not something that if you do wrong, you've totally blown it, right? That's sort of the idea that we're trying to move away from, where, you know, there is this rigid plan with this list of foods that you can't eat. And then if you eat one of those foods, boom, you're fat, right? That's not how it works, you know. And I would argue actually that the opposite is how it works. You know, that when you make eating an adequate amount of food your real priority, then, you know, your life gets better as a result. So I think we're going to end on that note. I think we had some interesting things come up. If we have some other things that come up in the meantime, maybe we'll try and add them to the meal planning group or post about them on the main page. But I appreciate everybody being here. April, do you want to say goodbye to everyone?
Good night, everyone.
All right, and we'll see you guys in the groups and forums and all that fun stuff. So talk to you later. Bye-bye.